You know, when we think of fossils, we usually imagine dusty bones in a museum. Motionless, silent, long forgotten. But every fossil was once alive. Every fossil once had eyes, lungs, muscles, and a heartbeat. And sometimes, those hearts stopped beating in ways so strange, so utterly bizarre, that even the scientists who studied them couldn't quite believe what they were seeing. Tonight, we're diving deep into the rock-hard evidence of the weirdest, most jaw-dropping deaths ever preserved in stone. Final moments, frozen for millions of years. And before we begin, hear us, a thought to sit with. These creatures never thought they'd become history. Strangest mysteries. They were just living, hunting, eating, mating, until fate struck. Sometimes in ways so dramatic that it feels like nature itself wrote a script. By the end of this journey, you might look at fossils in a whole new way. Not as relics, but as crime scenes. One of the most famous and unsettling fossil finds is something paleontologists call the fighting dinosaurs. Imagine opening a slab of rock and seeing two creatures locked in an eternal battle. A velociraptor claws curved and ready to slash, its mouth open mid-bite. And a protosaurus, a stocky plant eater, holding the predator's arm in its beak. Both of them frozen in the exact moment of their struggle. Not one escaping, not one winning. It's as if someone hit pause on time. Scientists believe a sudden sandstorm or a collapsing dune buried them instantly, trapping them in this fatal embrace. For 75 million years, they've been like that. Enemies in life, locked together in death. Then there's the whale that choked to death. Yes, you heard that right. In the fossil beds of Peru, scientists uncovered the remains of a prehistoric sperm whale, with the bones of a giant fish lodged deep in its throat. This wasn't just an awkward bite. The fish was far too big to swallow, and it got stuck, cutting off the whale's ability to breathe. There's something unsettling about it. A massive ocean predator brought down not by another hunter, but by its own last meal. It's one of those moments where you realize nature doesn't always grant dignity in death, but sometimes fossils capture not just death, but disaster. In China, there's a fossil of a pterosaur, a flying reptile, that seems perfectly preserved, except for one detail. Wrapped around its neck is the skeleton of a fish. This wasn't a peaceful end. The leading theory: the pterosaur swooped down to grab its prey, only for the fish to leap from the water, latch onto its throat, and drag both of them under. Neither survived. Millions of years later, they remained together in stone, predator and prey sharing the same watery grave. And then there's the tragedy of the pregnant ichthyosaur. Ichthyosaurs were marine reptiles that looked a little like dolphins, and in one particular fossil, a female is preserved in the very act of giving birth. You can see the tiny skeleton of her unborn offspring halfway emerged, for reasons still debated. Perhaps a sudden underwater landslide. Perhaps exhaustion. Both mother and child died in that moment. It's haunting, because it's such a human scene. Even after 250 million years, you can almost feel the struggle and loss frozen there. Some fossils don't just tell stories of individual deaths, but of catastrophic events. One of the eeriest examples comes from the Hell Creek Formation in the United States, a fossil site that many scientists believe may hold victims from the actual day the asteroid struck Earth, ending the age of dinosaurs. There, they found fish with tiny glass-like spherules embedded in their gills. Microscopic bits of molten rock from the asteroid impact. These fish likely died within hours of the collision, choking as the sky literally rained fire. It's death on a scale that's hard to comprehend. And yet, here's a proof! Locked inside their bones. And then there's the murder mystery of the ancient crocodile and the turtle. This fossil, found in Germany, shows the two in the middle of a violent encounter. The crocodile has its jaws clamped around the turtle's shell, clearly trying to crack it open. But that's where it gets strange. Both animals seem to have died at the same instant. Some scientists think they were caught in a sudden toxic gas release from a volcanic lake. A silent, invisible killer. One breath, and they were gone. The deeper you go into these stories, the more you realize fossils are not just remnants of life. They refrozen moments of action, drama, and chaos. They're windows into the strangest seconds that ever happened in nature's history. And in every case, death didn't just stop the story. It immortalized it. In part 2, we'll go even further, uncovering bizarre fossil deaths that defy everything we thought we knew. From creatures that seem to have died in impossible positions to evidence of prehistoric disasters so sudden they feel almost supernatural. What happened to them? And why does it still feel so eerie after millions of years?
Some fossil stories don't just make you raise an eyebrow, they make you question the very limits of what life and death can look like. And the deeper we dig, the stranger it gets. Take, for example, the death march of the horseshoe crab. Paleontologists in Germany uncovered a fossilized trail with a set of footprints preserved in fine sediment that ends abruptly. At the end of the trail is the fossilized body of the crab itself, perfectly intact. It's as if it was walking, step by step, and then stop forever. The odd thing, there's no sign of a predator. No injury. No struggle. Scientists believe the animal wandered into low-oxygen waters and suffocated mid-stride. In that moment, its final walk was written into the earth, and it's been walking there and stopping there for over 400 million years. Then there's the prehistoric fish that literally exploded in certain fossil beds in Germany's Messel pit. Researchers have found dozens of fossilized fish with broken backs, ruptured bellies, and scattered bones, but no signs of predators. The leading theory is both gruesome and strange. During decomposition in stagnant, gas-filled lakes, internal gases build up inside the dead fish's bodies, causing them to burst apart before they could be scavenged when the sediment buried them. Instantly afterward, the mid-explosion pose was frozen for eternity. One of the most eerie cases involves a group death, a mass grave of 31 ancient camels in Syria, all discovered in the same layer of sediment, all killed in exactly the same way. They weren't fossilized by natural disaster, but by human hands. Each camel's skull shows clean, deliberate cuts. The evidence points to a single slaughter event over 10,000 years ago. It's rare to think of human violence as something preserved in fossils, but here it is, an ancient massacre, still speaking from the bones. And speaking of mass death, few finds are as haunting as the ashfall fossil beds in Nebraska. Imagine a prehistoric watering hole filled with rhinos, camels, and horses. Then, a volcanic eruption hundreds of miles away blankets the area in fine, deadly ash. The animals keep breathing it in, layer by layer. Over several days, their lungs slowly fill, and they collapse where they stood. Many fossils here are so perfectly preserved you can see the ribs arched in their final breaths. Their unborn young still in the womb. It's a frozen tragedy that covers acres, an entire ecosystem taken in one slow, inescapable wave. Not all bizarre fossil deaths are violent. Some are simply strange. In Canada, scientists uncovered a 110-million-year-old fossil of a nodosaur, an armored plant-eating dinosaur. So well preserved it still has skin, scales, and armor plating. It looks less like a skeleton and more like a statue. The odd thing, it died far from where nodosaurs usually lived, and the preservation suggests it sank deep into the ocean after death. How did a land dinosaur end up at the bottom of the sea? Theories range from flash floods to collapsing riverbanks, but the exact sequence of events remains a mystery. Sometimes, the bizarre comes from timing, a death striking in the middle of something so ordinary that it becomes extraordinary in hindsight. In one fossil from China, a dinosaur is preserved mid-yawn. Or at least, that's what it looks like, mouth wide open, neck stretched forward. Scientists suspect it may have been opening its mouth to breathe during a volcanic ashfall, moments before collapsing. The open mouth became a permanent part of its death mask. And then there's the prehistoric traffic jam. In South Korea, researchers discovered a fossilized cluster of more than a dozen ancient turtles, all male. They were all heading in the same direction, toward what was once a large lake. The timing? Mating season. The lake, however, was toxic due to volcanic activity. The turtles swam in, and none of them swam out. Today, they remain locked in that same group formation, a strange and almost comical, but ultimately tragic, snapshot of bad timing. One of the most disturbing finds comes from an ancient forest in India, where scientists uncovered hundreds of fossilized tree trunks and in the hollow spaces between them, the fossilized bodies of small amphibians and reptiles. It seems a sudden flood drove the animals to climb the trees for safety, only for the water to keep rising until there was nowhere left to go. They drowned clinging to the trunks, and when the sediment settled, they were sealed inside nature's coffins. And then there's a fossil that almost feels cinematic, a small prehistoric mammal fossilized in the act of biting into a dinosaur's tail. Yes, you heard that right. For once, the mammal was the aggressor. The tiny creature had sunk its teeth deep into the tail of a young Psittacosaurus. What happened next is unclear. Maybe the dinosaur kicked back, maybe a predator interrupted them, but both died right there. The fossil remains a rare reminder that even the smallest players in the ancient world could sometimes be the boldest. Every one of these deaths feels like a scene ripped out of time, and the rock doesn't lie. There's no editing, no retakes. Nature chose the moment, and millions of years later, we're here, peering in, trying to understand the story. In part 3, the fossil record gets even stranger, with creatures whose deaths suggest behaviors we never imagined they had. Predators who may have been killed by their prey in shocking reversals, and some fossil scenes so perfectly timed they feel like photographs. And trust me, you haven't heard the weirdest ones yet. Some fossil deaths don't just tell you how an animal died, they hint at strange behaviors that we never would have guessed. Like the fossilized scene of a small group of prehistoric frogs in what used to be a shallow pond in China. At first glance, they just look like any other cluster of frog skeletons. But closer study revealed something odd. Nearly all of them are facing the same direction, mouths slightly open, legs outstretched. The scientists' best guess. They were all in the middle of a migration, moving in unison across the muddy pond bed. When the water suddenly drained or evaporated during a drought, the mud trapped them mid-step, and then baked hard in the sun, sealing them into the ground for millions of years. It's like catching a photograph of a single moment of confusion, frozen forever. But sometimes, the prey gets the last word. In Canada, paleontologists uncovered the fossil of a large predatory fish that had choked to death on another fish almost half its size. The second fish is still lodged halfway down its throat, perfectly preserved. The predator had clearly bitten off more than it could chew, literally. This kind of fossil is rare. But when it happens, it's like reading the final chapter of a story in one image. You can almost feel the panic, the desperate thrashing, before stillness set in. And then there's the infamous fighting dinosaurs fossil from Mongolia, a velociraptor and a protoceratops locked in combat. The velociraptor's claw is hooked into the other dinosaur's neck, while the protoceratops has its beak clamped tightly on the velociraptor's arm. Scientists believe a sudden sandstorm or collapsing dune buried them alive mid-fight. Neither predator nor prey won. Instead, they've been fighting for over 70 million years, trapped in that fatal stalemate. One of the more unsettling discoveries involves prehistoric insects, specifically ancient wasps. In Burmese amber, researchers found a wasp fossilized just as it was laying an egg inside the body of a spider. The spider, too, is preserved along with the silk threads of its unfinished web. Amber is one of the only substances that can preserve moments this small, and this one captures both predator and victim in an intimate, chilling moment that makes you realize how brutal nature has always been, even at the tiniest scales. In Wyoming, the Green River Formation has yielded countless fossils, but one stands out: a bird that died with its crop, the pouch in its throat used for storing food still full of unripe fruit. These fruits, scientists believe, may have been mildly toxic when eaten in large quantities. It's possible the bird gorged itself, became sick, and collapsed into the water, where it quickly sank and was buried. Today, you can still see the tiny seeds in its throat. A 50-million-year-old case of deadly overeating. Then there's the fossilized shark from Italy that seems to have died mid-swim, upside down. Sharks sometimes flip upside down briefly in a state called tonic immobility, usually during mating or when stunned, but in this case, The shark's spinal column shows damage that suggests a sudden underwater landslide. It may have been caught in a surge of sediment that flipped it, smothering it before it could right itself. Even plants have their own strange death stories. In Antarctica, scientists discovered fossilized forests, entire stands of trees that grew near the South Pole during warmer prehistoric times. In one layer, dozens of tree trunks are preserved with their growth rings abruptly ending at the same point, suggesting a sudden, catastrophic freeze. It's as if an entire forest went silent in a single season, the trunks still rooted in the ground, leaves still attached. And sometimes, fossils reveal a kind of double tragedy. In South Africa, researchers uncovered a prehistoric mammal-like reptile fossilized in its burrow curled protectively around a smaller animal. At first, scientists assumed it was its offspring. But after studying the bones, they realized the smaller animal was actually a completely different species, possibly sheltering there from a flood. The floodwaters came anyway, sealing them both in the burrow, whether they were allies in their final moments or simply two creatures trapped in the same desperate situation, we'll never know. There is also the drowning dinosaur herd of China, dozens of young sauropods fossilized together in a low-lying area. The sediment shows patterns consistent with a sudden surge of water. Likely from a flash flood, the smaller dinosaurs may have been separated from adults and swept into the floodplain, where the current was too strong to escape. The fact that they were all juveniles makes it even sadder. The group of the young, caught without protection, preserved as a silent reminder of nature's indifference. And finally, one of the most quietly haunting fossils ever found in Germany's Messel pit. Researchers discovered a pregnant mare, fossilized with her unborn foal still inside her. The outline of the foal is so clear you can see its tiny ribs and spine. Scientists believe toxic volcanic gases may have swept through the area, killing both instantly. The way the mare is preserved, legs bent as if in a final, futile attempt to rise, adds a layer of tragedy that feels deeply human. When we look at these fossils, it's tempting to think of them only as specimens, pieces of data. But in reality, they're more than that. They are moments, final breaths, sudden endings. They are chapters of a story that nature decided to write into stone long before we ever existed to read them, and in part for we'll dive into the most mind-bending fossil deaths of all, ones that seem to defy explanation entirely, where the cause is still debated and the truth may be stranger than any theory we can imagine. Some fossil deaths are clear enough that we can reconstruct the final moments with surprising accuracy, but then there are the ones that just don't make sense. Scenes frozen in rock that leave scientists scratching their heads. And sure, if they're looking at a natural disaster, a predator-prey chase, or something entirely different. Take, for instance, the fossilized skeletons found in a limestone quarry in Germany, dozens of prehistoric bats, all from the same layer of rock. All in nearly identical postures, wings folded close, heads tilted forward, bodies curled. The theory: they may have roosted together in a cave that suddenly flooded or filled with toxic gas. But there's no obvious volcanic activity in the area, and no clear flood evidence either. It is like a snapshot of an entire colony dropping lifeless in unison, and no one knows why. Or the death spiral of ichthyosaurs, marine reptiles from the Jurassic period. Several fossils have been found with their necks twisted into extreme, almost corkscrew shapes. This is something that doesn't happen naturally after death. One theory is that some kind of neurological disease caused them to spasm violently before dying. Another, more unsettling theory, is that they ingested toxic prey, maybe jellyfish or ammonites, that caused nerve damage and uncontrollable twisting. Either way, these fossils don't just show a body, they show pain. Then there is the fossil of a small theropod dinosaur discovered in China that seems to be mid-leap, but there is nothing beneath it. Its legs are extended, its arms out, as if pouncing, yet the ground layer it's preserved in shows no sign of an impact. The best guess is that it was buried during a volcanic ashfall while airborne, maybe leaping after prey or away from danger. But the idea of an animal literally dying mid-jump is strange enough that some scientists quietly wonder if something even stranger happened. Some fossils are bizarre because they preserve evidence of things that shouldn't have existed. Together, in South America, Paleontologists found a fossilized snake raptor on a cluster of dinosaur eggs, as if caught in the act of raiding a nest. The problem? The surrounding rock dates to a time when that snake species shouldn't have existed in that region, at least, according to everything we thought we knew. Was the dating wrong, or is this proof of an ancient migration path we never guessed? Either way, the snake has open jaws, and the half-crushed eggs tell you this wasn't a peaceful scene. In Antarctica, a strange fossilized pattern puzzled researchers for decades. Hundreds of tiny marine creatures all aligned in a spiral formation, perfectly preserved. At first, scientists thought it was just a natural current pattern, but when they mapped the sizes, they realized they got progressively larger toward the center, almost like they were following each other intentionally. Did they spiral together in a mating ritual? Or were they trapped in a vortex of ice and sediment that slowly closed in on them? The cause remains a mystery. One of the most unsettling examples comes from the Lobry tar pits in California, where fossils of predators are more common than prey. Coyotes, saber-toothed cats, dire wolves, and many found together, jaws open, claws extended. The leading theory: an animal would get trapped in the sticky tar, and its cries would draw predators looking for an easy meal, only for them to get trapped as well. Over time, this chain reaction built a fossil bed that feels almost like a trap set by nature itself, luring hunter after hunter to the same fate. But perhaps the strangest fossil deaths are the ones that seem staged. In Brazil, a fossil slab shows 3 different species of fish, a crustacean, and a small amphibian, all aligned perfectly, as if placed side by side. There's no sign of them being washed together by water. No evidence of scavenging. It's as if they died at the exact same time, in the exact same spot, and were preserved without shifting even a millimeter. Some scientists think this could be the result of an underwater toxic event that killed everything instantly, leaving them to drift down like falling leaves. Others aren't so sure. Then there's the sleeping dinosaur fossil from Mongolia, a small theropod curled up just like a modern bird tucking itself in for the night. It is preserved in a pose so peaceful you almost forget it as millions of years old. The likely explanation is that it was buried suddenly by a collapsing dune while sleeping, but something about its posture, the relaxed tail, the tucked head, makes it feel almost alive. As though it might just open its eyes if you waited long enough. Sometimes the weirdness comes not from how they died, but where they ended up. In Canada, miners discovered a perfectly preserved nodosaur of an armored dinosaur in the middle of what was once the open ocean. The details of its skin, armor, and even coloration are still visible, but how it got so far from land is anyone's guess. Did it wash out to sea after a flood? Did a collapsing riverbank send it into deep water? Or was it swept away by a massive storm? Whatever the cause, it sank to the seafloor, where sediment entombed it so well that it still looks like it could start walking if you touched it. And finally, there's a fossil that feels like a warning from the past. In France, scientists found the remains of dozens of fish whose bodies are twisted and bent in unnatural ways, as though they'd been caught in a powerful shockwave. Some suspect a meteor impact in the nearby ocean caused a sudden pressure wave that killed them instantly. If true, these fossils are the echoes of an ancient catastrophe, one that could happen again. What makes these fossils so compelling isn't just the mystery of their deaths, but the fact that they survived long enough for us to find them at all. Every bizarre position, every strange pairing, every inexplicable scene is a frozen second in a story we'll never fully read. They're proof that the world has always been stranger than we imagine, and that sometimes the past leaves us more questions than answers, because in the end, fossils aren't just bones or shells or impressions in rock. They're moments, and the most bizarre ones remind us that no matter how much we think we understand nature, it still keeps its secrets.